All right, let's dive into a topic that's not talked about very often. Female sexual pleasure.
Interesting.
We're going to look at a YouTube video by Crepin Gondo. And he makes some pretty bold points. Basically, his main argument is that neglecting a woman's sexual satisfaction has some pretty serious consequences on her mood, her relationships, even her overall well-being.
Yeah.
He uses some pretty strong imagery, too. He actually compares a sexually frustrated woman to a walking danger, or even a bomb waiting to explode.
Wow.
So to help us navigate this topic, we have an expert joining us today who specializes in relationship dynamics and human behavior.
It's glad to be here.
It's definitely an interesting topic.
He certainly doesn't shy away from strong language. It's almost like
Yeah.
he's trying to be provocative. What do you think? What do you think he's trying to achieve with that?
Well, I think it's definitely attention grabbing. Sometimes it takes a little bit of a jolt to get people to pay attention to something that they might otherwise avoid. We as a culture, we kind of tiptoe around conversations about sex and pleasure, especially when it comes to women.
Yes, especially when it comes to women.
So maybe he's using that hyperbole
Yeah.
to break through those societal barriers.
Yeah, and force us to confront this topic.
Okay, so maybe there's a method to his provocative style, but let's get specific. He claims that neglecting a woman's sexual needs can lead to some pretty serious consequences, like anger, resentment, even infidelity.
Wow.
In your experience working with couples, how much truth do you see in that?
Well, it's important to remember that everybody's experience is unique.
True.
So we can't make sweeping generalizations
Right.
about how every individual will react.
Sure.
However, stripped of the dramatic language, I think his point touches on real dynamic. When a core need in a relationship goes unmet consistently,
Yeah.
it's bound to create tension.
Right.
And that tension can spill over into other aspects of the partnership, leading to frustration, resentment, arguments, and in some cases, even seeking fulfillment elsewhere.
Wow.
So while the walking danger metaphor is exaggerated,
Yeah.
the underlying idea that unresolved frustration
Yeah.
can have negative consequences isn't totally off base.
I see. So it's not just about sex itself, but about the broader feeling of being heard, understood, and valued within the relationship.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
It's about feeling like your needs matter to your partner.
Yeah.
Yeah. He does get really specific.
Yeah.
He even lists some observable signs of a sexually frustrated woman.
Oh.
He claims that they're constantly nervous, quick to anger, critical of other people's happiness, and even age prematurely.
Wow.
So those are some pretty bold claims.
Yeah, I was wondering about those too. They seem a bit reductionist. Like he's attributing a whole range of complex human behaviors to a single cause.
You're right. It is important to not oversimplify things.
Yeah.
To approach those generalizations with a healthy dose of skepticism.
Right.
After all, nervousness, anger,
Right.
or even signs of aging can come from a whole bunch of factors, not just sexual frustration. So it's dangerous and frankly inaccurate to reduce someone's complex emotional state to a single explanation.
I agree.
However, what's potentially valuable in those examples is the underlying message.
Okay.
When someone is chronically unhappy or feeling neglected,
Yeah.
it can absolutely impact their emotional well-being and how we interact with the world. Often reflects our internal state.
So instead of taking those behaviors as literal signs of sexual frustration, maybe we should view them as potential red flags, that something deeper might be going on,
Right.
like a sign that there's a need for more open communication and understanding within the relationship.
Absolutely.
That's a much more constructive approach
right.
than just labeling someone as sexually frustrated based on a few outward behaviors.
Right.
It emphasizes empathy and understanding rather than placing blame or making assumptions.
Yep.
Now shifting gears a bit, he offers some specific advice for men in relationships. He basically says, guys, you need to step up and make sure your partner is enjoying herself in the bedroom.
Okay.
He argues that prioritizing a woman's orgasm strengthens the bond and leads to more satisfaction for both partners.
Interesting.
Is he onto something here?
Well, on the surface, it might sound a bit like a one-sided directive.
Yeah.
But if we kind of unpack it a little bit,
Okay.
I think his advice actually points to something really important.
Okay.
The idea of mutual satisfaction in relationships. What's fascinating here is that he's highlighting the often overlooked fact that pleasure shouldn't be a one-way street.
Okay.
It's about both partners feeling seen, heard, and yes, physically and emotionally fulfilled.
So Gondo's advice, although maybe a bit blunt, underscores the need for men to be more attentive and considerate lovers.
Yeah, and it's about shifting the focus from individual needs to creating a shared experience where both partners feel valued and prioritized.
So it's less about a checklist of techniques and more about cultivating a deeper sense of connection and shared pleasure.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that great sex isn't just about the physical act. It's about emotional intimacy, communication, and genuine care for your partner's well-being.
Now, Gondo doesn't just offer advice for men. He also challenges women to be more vocal about their needs and desires.
Right.
He basically says, ladies, speak up. Tell your partner what you want.
Okay.
It seems pretty straightforward. But in reality, talking about sex can be a lot harder than it sounds.
He's absolutely right that open communication is crucial, but it's often easier said than done, especially when it comes to something as personal and potentially vulnerable as sex.
Right.
So while his advice to be direct is well-intentioned, I think it's important to acknowledge the challenges and offer some practical strategies for navigating those tricky conversations.
So how do we move beyond the just speak up mantra and actually create a space where both partners feel comfortable sharing their desires and needs without fear of judgment or rejection?
That's a fantastic question.
It seems like something a lot of people would love to learn more about.
And it leads us to some really important insights about fostering open communication in relationships.
All right.
But before we dive into those strategies,
Yeah.
I think it's worth taking a closer look at some of the specific examples he uses to illustrate his points.
You mean like the whole nervousness and snapping at people thing?
Exactly.
Okay.
It was definitely attention grabbing.
Yeah,
But I'm curious if there's more to unpack there.
I think so.
Maybe some valuable insights hiding beneath the surface level provocation.
I see you hit the nail on the head.
I think there's a lot more to explore there.
Okay.
So let's do exactly that. Let's
Yeah.
peel back the layers
Okay.
and see what we can learn.
Let's do it. So let's revisit those behaviors that he highlighted, specifically the ones that he links to female sexual frustration. Being nervous, easily irritated, not being happy for others. You mentioned that there might be some deeper insights there. What do you see there?
You're absolutely right. It's easy to dismiss those descriptions as oversimplifications. And to a certain extent, they are.
Right.
But I think it's worth asking, what if he's using those behaviors as metaphors?
Okay.
What if he's trying to get at the ways unmet needs, any unmet needs, can manifest in a person's behavior?
So instead of saying she's always on edge, maybe we should be asking what might be causing her to feel so stressed and on edge.
Precisely.
Yeah.
What if we step back from the hyperbole and consider the possibility that he's trying to point out that when someone is chronically unhappy or feeling neglected, and the neglect can be physical or, yes, sexual,
Right.
it can impact their emotional state and color their interactions with others.
So if you're constantly carrying around like a heavy load of unmet needs and emotional baggage, it's going to show up in how you treat the people around you.
Exactly.
Right.
You might be more irritable, quick to anger, or find it hard to genuinely share in other people's joy.
Okay.
And while he focuses specifically on sexual frustration in women, I think this idea has much broader applications. Anyone who's experiencing prolonged dissatisfaction in this significant area of their life, whether it's their career, their relationships, their sense of purpose,
Right.
might exhibit similar behaviors.
So it's not necessarily about a lack of orgasms, but rather a deeper sense of unfulfillment or a disconnect between
Right.
what you need and what you're actually experiencing in your life.
That's a key distinction.
Okay.
While sexual satisfaction is undoubtedly important in romantic relationships,
Sure.
it's often a symptom of a larger issue.
Okay.
It could be a lack of emotional connection, a feeling of not being valued or prioritized by your partner, or even just a general sense of being out of sync with your own needs and desires.
This raises an interesting question, and maybe for our listener too. If these behaviors aren't always directly linked to sexual frustration, how can we differentiate between someone who's simply having a bad day and someone who's genuinely struggling with deeper relationship issues?
That's a great question.
Is there a way to tell the difference?
And it's an important one.
Yeah.
And to be clear, we're not qualified to diagnose anyone or offer specific relationship advice.
Right.
But what we can do is encourage self-reflection and open communication.
Okay.
If you notice a pattern of these behaviors in yourself or your partner,
Yeah.
it might be a sign that something needs to be addressed.
Instead of jumping to conclusions
Oh.
or slapping labels on people, it's about creating space for honest dialogue and trying to understand what's really going on.
Beneath the surface.
It's about approaching the situation with curiosity and empathy rather than judgment.
Yeah.
And if something feels off, the best approach is to initiate a conversation with your partner.
Express your concerns in a loving and non-accusatory way.
Okay.
For example, you could say, "Hey, I've noticed you seem a bit stressed lately.
Yeah.
Is there anything I can do to support you? Or is there something you'd like to talk about?"
That sounds a lot more productive than just assuming the worst
What?
or letting resentment build up in silence.
Absolutely.
Right.
Open and honest communication is the foundation of any healthy relationship.
For sure.
And remember, it's a two-way street.
Yeah.
Both partners need to feel safe and comfortable expressing their needs and desires.
Okay. And that brings us back to his advice for women. To be more direct about what they want in the bedroom. It sounds simple enough, but as we've already discussed, actually putting that into practice can be a lot more challenging.
You're right.
Yeah.
Vulnerability and directness, especially when it comes to sex, can be incredibly difficult for some people.
Yeah.
It requires a high level of trust
Yeah.
and a sense of safety within the relationship.
So how do we create that kind of atmosphere, an environment where both partners feel empowered to open up and share their deepest desires without fear of being judged or shut down?
You've hit on a crucial point.
It feels like kind of a chicken and egg situation. You need trust to communicate openly, but open communication also builds trust. So how do you get that ball rolling?
It is a bit of a chicken and egg scenario,
Yeah.
and it's a process that requires ongoing effort and commitment from both partners.
Yeah.
And it all starts with building a foundation of trust and mutual respect.
Yeah, like you can't expect someone to open up if they don't feel safe. It's just not going to happen.
Exactly.
So how do we cultivate that?
It starts with active listening, validation, and non-judgmental communication.
So really paying attention to what your partner is saying, both verbally and non-verbally, and acknowledging their feelings without dismissing them.
Yes.
Okay.
It's about creating a space where your partner feels heard and understood, even if you don't necessarily agree with everything they're saying.
And the non-judgmental part is crucial, because who wants to open up about something so personal if they're going to be criticized?
Absolutely.
So while his advice to just speak up is well-intentioned, I think it's important to acknowledge that it's not always that simple.
I agree.
We need to create a context where that vulnerability can flourish.
Right.
So how do we actually put this into practice? What are some tangible things couples can do to create a more open and communicative dynamic around sex?
Well, one simple but effective strategy is to start by talking about what you like and enjoy.
So instead of focusing on what's not working, start with the positives.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're sharing your own preferences and desires. In a positive and non-threatening way, you invite your partner to do the same. It can create a sense of reciprocity and encourage a more open dialogue.
That makes sense. It's like you're modeling the kind of vulnerability
Precisely.
and openness that you're hoping to receive.
And it's important to remember that these conversations don't have to be big, formal, we need to talk about our sex life kind of events.
Oh, thank goodness.
Right.
Those can be so awkward.
It's often more effective
Yeah.
to weave these conversations into everyday life.
Okay.
Maybe you're cuddling on the couch after dinner or just relaxing in bed.
Yeah, those moments of connection and intimacy can be great opportunities to open up.
Absolutely.
And it doesn't have to be super serious either.
You can use humor, playfulness, even a little bit of flirtation to keep things light and enjoyable.
So it's not about delivering a perfectly rehearsed speech, but rather about creating a space for ongoing dialogue
That's a great way to put it.
and discovery.
It's about approaching intimacy as a shared journey where both partners are actively engaged in exploring, learning, and growing together.
And that's something that goes beyond just the physical act of sex, right? It's about cultivating a deeper emotional connection and understanding.
You hit the nail on the head.
Okay.
That's what he's ultimately trying to convey. Even though his language might be a bit rough around the edges at times.
Yeah.
He's saying that neglecting a woman's sexual pleasure isn't just about denying her orgasms. It's about failing to truly see her, hear her, and connect with her on a deeper level.
Okay.
And that's something that applies to all relationships, regardless of gender or sexual orientation.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that intimacy is a fundamental human need, and that neglecting that need can have far-reaching consequences for individuals and relationships.
Well said.
This has been such an interesting discussion. Thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure.
And to our listeners, we leave you with this final thought. What are you doing to cultivate a culture of open communication and mutual respect in your relationships? It's a question worth pondering, both for your own well-being and the health of your connections. Until next time, keep diving deep.